Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. Because success has patterns, and often the best insights aren't found in the boardrooms, but in the field. I'm your host, Marla Moody, a transformational leadership coach, and I'm passionate about helping leaders and teams thrive. Today, we're going to talk about the power of culture. We'll get into some operations and the strategy in building organizations that truly make impact. My guest is Henriette. She's the president of Culture, Operations, Resources, and Evaluation at the Literacy Lab, a nonprofit working to improve literacy outcomes for children and communities. So get ready. Henriette is here to tell us what works. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate you coming on today. When we met a while back, I loved your part and your passion for really building culture, caring for people, and that you actually like operations and believe in it. That's a woman after my own heart. If you would start by introducing yourself and what you do, we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Henriette Recny. I work at the Literacy Lab as the president of Culture, Operations, Resources, and Evaluation. And in August of this year, 5-year work anniversary. And I have the great honor to work with our human resources team, our IT and systems team, and our measurement, evaluation, and learning team. And it's sort of very much a labor of love and a lot of care between teammates that makes the work really rewarding.
So, how did you even get to the Literacy Lab?
That is a long story, and I'm sure other guests have said the same thing. I'm actually a career teacher. In my career, I've been very fortunate to work with every grade from K to 12. I also taught college and was a sort of lecturer for a graduate student course. And with that, I have always looked for ways that I could do more. In the sense, I would work somewhere and ask myself, like, who am I working with and what might they need more of from me? And so really early on in my career, I started working with a lot of Black youth in educational access settings and noticed that they consistently sat in my office longer than sort of our paper appointments. And I kind of looked at that pattern and asked myself, like, why is that? And really got to know a lot of the students really well, not just who they are in the classroom, but their journey to get to school. And there was a common thread that wherever they were coming from, usually they didn't get what they needed. And I ended up working with students who hadn't read a whole novel or hadn't written an entire essay before. And so I started meeting with those students and thinking more of being an educator as a mentor. And from there, I sort of moved around a little bit in terms of all the roles I had at one particular nonprofit, but the sort of thread, again, was constantly looking for where I could do more. And by the time I sort of left that college access and success program, I was very much interested in what it means to have a workplace where you're purpose-driven, but that doesn't mean you have to be exhausted. Very often in nonprofits, people are very passionate about what the mission is, what the cause is. And because nonprofits don't have as much resources, there is a situation where people get really burnt out. And so I was really interested in carving out cultures and communities amongst staff that could really support people, not just to survive, but to thrive in nonprofits. A lot of them were coming from very similar backgrounds where they were often the first generation in their family to go to college. And they weren't first generation because that was a choice that their parents or their grandparents made. They were first generation because they came from communities that were under-resourced and also underestimated, quite frankly. And so a lot of them sort of had this drive that was very much not about their individual success, but thinking about what they could do to sort of bring their family, therefore the community, with them through college graduation. And so a lot of them put that at the forefront, and that was very much part of their motivation when they were talking to me about who they were, but also going through the college process, because I have the honor to stay in touch with so many of them.
Fast forward to today with the Learners Lab. Like, give me a snapshot of what you do today. What are the problems you're solving? Who are you working with?
Yeah, so the Literacy Lab started in 2009, took as its core belief that literacy is a human right, but it's also foundational for success throughout somebody's sort of lifetime. And so we take a look at the national literacy crisis and really think about like where are the students who need us most and how do we support them. Currently, if we look at the data, it's only 36% of fourth graders can read at a proficient level. And in terms of caregivers, only 130 million caregivers cannot read their child a simple story. So we approach this from a dual model. The first sort of aspect of our model is that we take sort of fellows who are community based educators and provide them with the instruction and training that they need to go into schools and offer students literacy instructions. And the second part of that model is we are going into schools with research backed curricula and working with students on their reading and sort of working to make them kindergarten ready. So we're really trying to interrupt early on the situation that leads to the national reading crisis that I just described.
Thank you for doing that. What leadership challenges do you face as you're really trying to maximize the impact that you guys have?
I think a challenge I faced early on was how to address staff feedback when we were very much in a startup culture. The organization grew pretty quickly, but its central operations team did not keep pace with the programming end of things. And so early on, I came into the organization and sort of was very interested in the question of like, what do I do first? And what that looked like is I looked at all the available data and really got proximate and talked to people across the organization to figure out like what I needed to prioritize when everything seemed urgent and everything seemed like a priority. And so there was a lot of urgency around getting central operations to a place where it was making that work sustainable. And so I think that is one of the sort of earlier challenges that I face in the role for sure.
Did you have support, especially when you think through leaders? Sometimes leaders don't get operations and the structure and stuff. How was that for you?
Yeah, I had tons of support and I'm so grateful for it. I'm lucky enough that I work with somebody to this day. Her name is Heather. She is the CEO and president of the Literacy Lab, and I've actually known her since 2010. So there is an aspect of knowing somebody and how they work and what they need that was really supportive to me in this role. But I also had veterans on the staff who had been there for 5, 10 years. And one beautiful thing about the Literacy Lab is when people say, like, if you need something, just ask, and they really mean it. And so there was a lot of sort of institutional knowledge that was shared with me that was really important as sort of like a data set for me to go about doing the sort of work of getting central operations where it needs to be. And the other beautiful thing is I had a lot of people who maybe didn't consider themselves experts, but they were experts in what they did and were able to support my onboarding. It's really about that information piece and sort of building those early connections with like the teammates. And that was enough for me in that first year in particular.
What's really important about onboarding for you? Like, what are those elements that just are non-negotiables?
Yes. So when I onboard somebody, I tell them that they have three priorities. Their first one is to connect. I really want somebody to feel like they are connecting with people across the organization and learning about who they are as people and professionals and how that work sort of like connects, how they might intersect on a daily basis. So the connection piece is really important for somebody who's new to a particular organization. The second one is learn, take in as much as you can. The work will sort of pile on soon enough. So, as much as we can, really giving people the ability and the opportunity to take their time and like I said, review that data, do the audits that they need to do to figure out what our systems are and what they could be. And then the third one is really figure out what your initial priorities would be. So you've sort of connected with people, you've learned about what's going well, you've learned about the challenges, you've kind of did your learning and are making connections. So the hope is by that third piece, that sort of prioritization, you have a sense of where you need to go next. And that makes people feel like they truly have a solid foundation in the organization before all those priorities stack up.
That threefold really almost gives that relief of, like, you're expected not to know everything right at first, but there's a way of not only learning the knowledge, but also the people. What is the cost of people not onboarding well? What do you see as the liability of it?
I think on one hand, it's very much an individual thing, right? And so you would have somebody who does not get the onboarding that they need, and pretty soon they are overwhelmed. And this sort of person that you hired because of their experience, their knowledge, and their expertise and the mindsets that we're looking for can get very exhausted very quickly. And then we kind of see them just treading water, just doing sort of what they can because they don't have everything that they need to sort of just do the thing. That's why we take onboarding to the extent we can very seriously because one, we don't want to burn people out. The other thing is in an organization, an individual is part of an organization. So the small is part of the whole. And so when you have just one person, especially if you have a smaller staff, not being positioned to do their job with excellence, it impacts everything. And so I really think it's about paying attention to the individual and how their work relates to the whole is a really important aspect of the work.
It's brilliant. I was doing an interviewing earlier this week, and it's someone who he's a headhunter. He finds the CEOs and the importance of onboarding even the C-suite and the executives. So someone who is passionate about onboarding, what do you say about the difference between onboarding someone at different levels of the organization?
That's a good question. In my experience, it's often the sort of roles that tend to be like the coordinators and the associates and managers have more resources for onboarding, which is absolutely great because those tend to be filled by people early in their career and make sure they're set up for success and we start to build that confidence. But I learned just through experience and talking to other people who do this type of work that the sort of higher you go up, the fewer sort of resources there are. And I think that's a secret that I would like to share is that often people sort of struggle with imposter syndrome. And when somebody at my organization sort of talks about that, I sort of ask them to sort of say, why do you think it's you as opposed to the environment? And I tell them that very few leaders know what they're doing 100% of the time. And a lot of leadership is learning on the job. It's about being able to say, I don't know, but also having the initiative to go find out. And so I think that's something that I want people to know is that nobody is born into a leadership position, but you sort of grow through it. And I think that's a very different model of leadership than some people might have grown up with.
That question is brilliant. Why do you think it's you and not the environment or the situation? That seems like a really grounding question. When you ask that, how does that shift their mindset?
Yeah, it can take a while because they internalize these ideas about themselves. And so when you're dealing with something that requires a mindset shift, that is not one conversation that can take years for some people. And I would be not being very honest if I said, like, I figured it all out.
Right.
But when you start pointing out situations, the systems, the structures that contribute to a workplace feeling like it's not for you 100%, or a role that's not for you 100%, people start to see it. And so I have somebody on my team who is just so brilliant and is so curious and hungry to sort of grow in her role. And she struggles with feeling like she's worthy of the role when she was promoted. And I started sort of asking, like, why do you feel that way? And she didn't even know. A lot of it is about sharing the stories of other people, sometimes with myself, that sort of make it clear, like, there are things in our sort of nonprofit industrial complex that contribute to us feeling like we're not enough. It's really important to stress that the answers are out there and we'll get through it together. Seems to be sort of the most important thing for people to hear at that time and provide examples of very tangible ways they sort of can get to where they want to go in spite of the environment as we try and sort of make that environment different than what has been in the past.
So you're using a we instead of a you and a me, that let's do it together, because that imposter syndrome can completely keep people from doing anything, moving forward at all. So I like that idea that we're walking to this together. Was there a time or a moment or a situation that something you were doing just stopped working and you had to shift? I love the laughter.
Yes. That's all the time. So something that we try and work on at our organization is the loss that you might feel when you work on a project, but the organization needs to change direction, and you feel like you put all this sort of care and effort and time into this project, and ultimately it's not for right now, and so you have to kind of put it down and pivot. And so that happens all the time. And I did struggle early on with like that feeling of loss of that sunken cost. But one thing that helped me sort of like accept it, but also embrace it is sort of being an adaptive leader, really figuring out when and how I enter a particular project, and is it actually what's needed in a particular moment at an organization. And so that's one of the ways that I sort of try and just move on, at least mentally. But in general, it's about constantly pivoting, paying attention to sort of the data, both internal and external, and really sort of being able to say, okay, what next? What is actually needed, as opposed to what do I need to push forward?
There's a level of flexibility than what I'm hearing as a leader who is going to be moving forward in that pivot. What do you think the hidden cost would be if that wasn't handled well in light of the change and the pivot?
I think in general, what we try and accept as a truth at our organization is that change is constant. And whether or not people were involved in that change process and that decision, there is a feeling of loss. There's a feeling of grief. If it's not done well, people feel like they're being led along rather than worked alongside with. And that often leads to disengagement, something that is super important for building a community that we try and embrace as much as possible is that idea of voice and choice, that early engagement from everybody from our coordinators to our executive team. If we get those voices on the front end and kind of keep people updated, usually people are a lot more willing to come with you and build that new future together, as opposed to just outlining everything and say, hey, here is where we're going. They feel like they're a part of something.
That's great. If you had to give an advice to a leader in a different organization that's really struggling with that constant change, or maybe they're not dealing with it, but the people that work with them do, what would your few tips be?
Take a breath and pause. First and foremost, I don't think leaders have enough time to reflect. Often they're going from meeting to meeting, and the work happens in sort of the spaces between, or sort of early in the morning or into evening. So I think the first thing is a pause. The second thing I would say is encapsulated by a phrase I often use is be a gardener. Really think about what are the conditions your staff need to sort of flourish. What are the conditions that lead to the great big ideas, and really paying attention to that. I always speak, as my team will tell you, about plants. And I kind of say, well, plants don't grow without nutrients in the soil, without water, without sunlight. And so I look at organizations a lot like that, like what do I need to contribute for us to do our best work, is a sort of lens I try and take on during those moments.
There's dormant times and strong growth time. There's times when you fertilize and amend the soil, and there's times when you see the fruit. And oftentimes we push ourselves, like we just let me work a little in the nighttime, and we stretch it out and become almost mechanical. And starting with the breath is just like what I'm hearing is like, let's reset and see what's true. If you see a leader that just can say it, "Yeah, I know I need to rest. I'll do that later." What advice do you give a leader to really help them be a garden and not be this industrial gut it out?
I do think it starts with the self. One of the most consistent themes of feedback that I've gotten over my career is that I don't take care of myself. And it took me several years to get to the place where that is not necessarily the most dominant feedback that I am given. And part of that is I was setting a very unhealthy example for my team. I said things like, take your lunch and take your days off, but they saw me coming in. I was often one of the first people there and often one of the last ones leaving. And so even if they believed that I could sort of just be the kind of leader that would accept days off and sort of accept the lunch break, accept that you sort of view connection as work. Those are all things that are true for me as a leader. But if you don't see that person embracing the same, it can be sort of this thing is like, I don't know. But you also feel guilty because eventually your team may grow to sort of care about each other. And they're like, well, this person is doing all this work. How can I possibly not do the same? And so I think that's a huge part of it, just making sure that it's not sort of do as I say and not as I do, but there's a little bit of modeling there. And something I try and share with my team is that I don't believe in a work-life balance. I think that that concept is what partly set me up for sort of failure and burnout is because I sort of thought that was even possible. And so I
Yep.
really try and think about the harmony between work and other aspects of my life and find that that allows me to sort of have work be something prominent at one part of the year, but maybe not another. It allows me to sort of say when I'm tired, actually, I need to take a step back before I continue this work, because if I keep pushing it, it ultimately will not be as good as I think it will. So I do think a lot of it starts with like that internal work piece. And something that we do as a team is we have something called an It's Okay list. And it is a sort of list of our unofficial culture. And so there's things on that list like, I am going to take naps as my lunch break because that is what I want to do. It can be something as simple as, I'm going to take that day off, or it's okay to not feel like working during a day and to do something that might inspire thinking, like research is work, learning is work. And a lot of people don't accept that because we're so used to having to produce something tangible, as opposed to sort of just expanding our competencies.
100%. The it's okay list, building culture, and that it sounds like that really fights directly into that guilt piece because you're giving yourself permission, others are giving yourself permission to have a nap under your desk or to take that walk or go fishing. I've been teaching a workshop about this where you look at energy and how to maximize energy rather than maximizing time. And it goes back to that organic piece. And so that idea of an it's okay list really fits into to that well. But the guilt of not stopping I hear over and over again. And there's especially in that nonprofit where we're doing such good work, well, we could do just a little bit more. But where does that turn into harm, harming ourselves and then harming work as we get tired out? What are your thoughts on that of like even how to start catching the fact that you need a break, whatever that break might mean?
Yes. So I believe that once you know you're burnt out, it's already too late. And so I think it is one, knowing yourself and those signals that you might be headed in that direction before you're even there. And so I think that connects definitely to the idea that leaders need to take time and reflect about how they're showing up. And if they're not showing up in the ways that they would like and the ways that they say they want to move, really asking themselves why, and really figuring that out, I think is super important. I think another thing that it's important for leaders to do is to not get to that burned out place is ask your team for feedback.
Mm.
It takes time to build that culture, but you may be thinking you have all these things that you have to do to be the kind of leader that they want you to be, and you're sort of spinning in all directions, but they actually need you to work on these 1 to 2 things. And that would be sort of the most impactful, the most meaningful. So I think it is also about engaging with your team and asking them, well, what do you need from me? What support can I provide? And really, people will tell you if you ask them in the right way. So I think that internal work coupled with really getting that information from the people around you that maybe see things that you don't see on a daily basis can be really helpful for you to understand where your tipping point might be or what those signals are.
And I very much agree that. What has this work that you're doing, what has it taught you about people in general?
A lot. lot. A lot. One of the things I try and remind myself is to never lose the human aspect of the work. And once you accept that as something that you have to constantly keep in the forefront of your mind, it means that you have to be proximate. It means that you have to make connections with people one on one in group spaces. You have to show up, you have to engage. What I've learned, I think, the most, being in my position and doing the work I do is when you interact with people, it's always a test to see if you can be trusted. Whether you're aware of it or not, there's these bids for your attention through every interaction, especially as a leader. So I think what I've learned about working with people is you have to show up in a certain way. And if you don't, you may need to say, I am sorry. And I can't tell you how incredibly powerful it is for a leader to say, I'm sorry, or I don't know, because that vulnerability can be very much appreciated by people, especially if they view you as a role model, but maybe don't think that they could ever be in your position. The other thing I've realized working with people is it's very important to have high expectations, but the support has to also match. So again, you're sort of getting to know people really one-on-one and asking periodically, how can I better support you? What do you need from me? Asking pretty consistently, again, demonstrating that you view them as not just professionals, but humans with other parts of your life, with a body, which is important not to ignore, certainly. But asking that question of like, how are you doing? And meaning it and doing it consistently is also something that I learned is really important when you're sort of working with people. There's always time for like the right work. And often that right work is that connection and that humanity piece.
Yeah. Sometimes leaders get so busy that it's hard for them to meet with their direct reports. What do you suggest is a good rhythm for meeting with your direct reports?
I actually meet with mine weekly, and sometimes even more. I wish I could say I could always keep that time sacred on the same day at the same time, but I can't always. Sometimes I need to be a little bit flexible. So one, telling them that you hold that as a very important space for both of you, and you'll try and be as consistent as possible is super important. But I do think a lot of it is about connecting with people, working with them for a while and seeing how they function. We do these things called How to Work With Me manuals, and it's taken from a book. I believe it's No Hard Feelings. And it's
Hmm.
the idea that part of what you're doing when you start working with somebody new is you ask them what might seem to be very simple questions, but we also don't ask them all the time. And so at my organization, people are like, oh, I'm so bad at giving feedback. Can you give me a resource? And ultimately, often what I end up doing is, yes, I provide that resource, but I also ask them, have you asked that person how they like to receive feedback? Have you asked them their communication preferences? Are you a morning person, an evening person? If I call you, will you screen my calls and not pick up? And so I think like asking those questions are super important. So when you're asking these questions, including of your direct reports, you get to know what they need. And as you sort of set things up around that, you can figure out what adjustments need to be made. A lot of people have very technical definitions for equity work, but a lot of it is figuring out who people are and what they need and providing that, right? And so while I meet with my direct reports most of the time weekly, some of them might need something else. Like I've had somebody who in the beginning of the week wanted an hour and the checkout towards the end of the week to kind of talk about their progress or anything that came up during the week. That said, it doesn't always have to be a meeting. You can sort of, hey, I have these questions through Google Chat, and sometimes that's how it has to be. But I do think it's about making adjustments for the direct reports on your team and sort of making sure that when those expectations stay high, your support is as well.
I'm embarrassed to tell you, there was a time when I was building a team and I met with them max once a month. And the feedback I was getting, because I always ask for feedback, was I was a micromanager, I wasn't trusting them, all these things. I shifted to once a week, some people for 30 minutes, some people for 2 hours, depending on if I was working with them on different things. And the shifting of being trusted, being empowered. It was a night and day shift of their attitude and their work performance. So it had nothing to do with their quality of work. It had to do with me being a cog in the wheel because I wasn't giving them that face-to-face time. That was a huge lesson for me. And if you would to give the one nugget of advice to a new leader, where would you start with that?
Yeah, I think it's very much in sort of represented by my personal motto, which is start where you are, but don't stay there. It is very easy to feel like as a leader that there is no shortage of work to do, and that can be very overwhelming and can actually keep you from being proximate and connecting with your people because you're constantly sort of doing projects. Again, pause and check in with your people. A big part of it is prioritizing and really sort of thinking about what is most meaningful, what is most useful for the organization is a really important question to ask, and be okay with leaving the rest for now, right? There's always time for the right work, but sometimes trying to do it all at once actually undermines what you say you want to do, which is making an organization greater. So I think that's a super important aspect of starting where you are, but not staying there. The other thing that might be helpful in that respect is really demonstrating and modeling learning. Again, there's this sort of very old fashioned idea of leadership is you have all the answers, you've done all the learning, you have all the experience. So to sort of make sure that your team sees you learning and sort of you share that learning as well can be incredibly helpful because they'll also start to realize that their learning is also important within their role. So that learning culture piece is super important. And the other reason why I say start where you are and don't stay there is because a lot of leaders are perfectionists. I always say to people now, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And perfection can really keep you from putting stuff out in the universe of your workplace. And so just admitting like this is what it is, it's good enough for now, and opening it up for feedback, you'll grow through that feedback. So I do think it's also about that vulnerability as well.
So well said. Thank you. And I really hope that uh, that steeps down into all of us. We don't have to have all the answers and start where you are. And we don't have to do it all at once. Like I heard you say that too. The most hope I had, we'd been a new area team for about a year. It was Central Asia and it had been undermanaged. It was challenging place to work in all aspects, and my boss just wanted it all done the first year, and it was challenging. I remember about a year in, he goes, "You know what, Marla? I realize we can't do this in a year. So your wisdom is great, and thank you for that."
You're
So,
welcome.
Henriette, it's been great talking with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What Works with Marla Moody. Until next time, keep leading with clarity, developing your team, and discovering what works.